Hey, what's going on everyone? So a long time ago, I purpled Noctis. With his rework, LD, and burst, the king chosen by the crystal is back in the spotlight. The crystal light? Either way, if you're interested in what he offers to a party, stick around and find out. Noctis is a primarily ranged attacker unit, who can put out high damage in few counted turns. He has a unique buff in Armiger that enhances his attacks as well as boosts his max bravery, and he has pretty strong forms of turn manipulation. As just mentioned, Armiger is Noctis' unique buff which raises max bravery. It stacks up to 5, improving its effect as the level goes up. With it active, all his attacks get an extra hit to them. He also has a debuff in Point Blank Warp, which lowers defense and acts as a condition for his follow-up attack. The follow-up attack itself raises Noctis' bravery based on attack, has 3 hits, and then an HP attack. I will not be counting the extra hit from Armiger when I'm referring to his skills moving forward, so that's just something to keep in mind. His skill 1 is Shooting Star, 2 single target ranged hits and then 2 group ranged hits into an HP attack with 50% splash. It applies Point Blank Warp to all enemies and also grants Noctis a generic max bravery buff. Breaking or attacking a broken enemy turns this into Shooting Star Plus for the next cast, which is slightly stronger, can trigger a follow-up attack, and will launch the main target and prep the other targets to be launched. It also does not increase turn count, will revert to Shooting Star afterwards, and gives Noctis 1 level of Armiger. Also, it moves his next turn to before the target enemy's turn if it happened to be after that enemy's turn. His skill 2 is Warp Strike. Technically it's Death Drop, but with a weapon passive it's Warp Strike. 4 single target ranged hits into an HP hit. It grants Noctis a generic attack buff, applies Point Blank Warp onto the enemy, and like Shooting Star, becomes Warp Strike Plus when breaking or attacking a broken target. Warp Strike Plus grants Armiger, is stronger, can trigger a follow-up attack, and can move his next turn, and also only lasts for 1 cast. At any stacks of Armiger, his Brave and HP attacks are enhanced to be a bit stronger, and at 5 stacks become 2+ forms. The HP 2+ can trigger a follow-up attack similar to his plus skills, and is honestly a really solid attack. His EX is Conjure Armiger, 12 single target hits that increases the level of Armiger by 3. Pretty simple. Going to EX Plus improves his offensive capabilities greatly, as well as his longevity. Realization improves the damage of the cast, as well as granting him a free cast of his base skills and additional ability after the EX. Speaking of his additional ability, it sets both of his skills to their plus forms, giving you options for follow-up attacks and launches immediately after, and is a strong option when looking at turn control. 1 ingot has the EX cast apply Point Blank Warp as well as giving it a plus form when attacking an enemy with the debuff, which deals splash damage and reapplies the debuff. 2 ingots starts Noctis off with 2 stacks of Armiger, auto applies Point Blank Warp onto enemies at the start of each wave, and raises his max bravery and attack. 3 ingots changes the EX cast to give it an HP attack after the first 4 hits, making it much more efficient at any bravery amount. It also gives the base version of the EX cast splash damage and improves the splash of the plus form. His LD grants him Steel Pirouette, 8 group hits that deal total HP damage. Like his plus skills, Noctis will do a follow-up attack if attacking an enemy with Point Blank Warp, and will also move his turn to before the enemy's next turn if applicable. For the whole party, it grants Warp Step, a buff which can't be extended and basically does the turn before enemy mechanic for the other units, as well as not adding to turn count. On Noctis, it also gives him 3 levels of Armiger, maxing him out immediately if used as his opener, and then a new buff in Bonds of Amity, which raises his initial bravery and grants regen. The LD passive increases attack. I was very fortunate and got his burst, which is pure single target brave shave and HP damage. The burst effect, however, has him do a new follow-up attack after any unit's main action if the cursor targets an enemy for the action while it's active, so this does not include launch moves or counters. This affects additional abilities as well, but those are kinda weird and even buffing AAs can trigger it, so I don't know. This does include himself as it's considered a different follow-up attack, and it does function during another unit's burst phase. So if you have a Noctis friend with burst, you'd want to use his first and then go into your own. But do note that like all burst effects, 2 from the same unit will not stack, so you'll only get follow-ups from 1 of the Noctis. If you also happen to get Noctis burst and want to preserve Warp Step on him, you'll need to use it as the last move before the finisher, as the buff can't be extended, meaning it'll just run out on Noctis before you finish the burst phase. So Noctis was an LD pity target for me, and for some a burst pity target. If it wasn't obvious from other content creators and the community in general, he's probably the most standout LD and burst unit in these first few months. His play is a little confusing, but considering that it's easier to maintain armature now, LD adding to EX recast, and an even greater form of turn manipulation, even with non-optimal play, he's pretty good, and offers benefits to the whole team. Surprising considering most damage units are usually selfish. His longevity in the meta is insane, being able to be relevant to this day with the right team composition and still ranking very highly in general and range damage lists. His LD has yet to be rerun in an event outside of pandemic scheduling, so what could he possibly have in store for him? Well, honestly, I don't think a rework would be necessary, so it would all come down to an LD extension. He is a protagonist, and some have gotten very impressive LD extensions, others have gotten less impressive ones. Honestly, I feel like he'll land more in the latter camp. I think we could expect the LD cast to gain a second HP hit, probably around the 2 or 3 hit mark, and possibly also be able to inflict point blank warp with it, but that's about it. He doesn't have a unique icon effect above him per se, but as a singular character, I think he'd get very cluttered visually considering that armature already summons the crystalline weapons around him. Noctis is a strong pickup for both the near future and the far future. His damage is good thanks to his follow-up attacks and high hit counts. His turn manipulation gives you the ability to burst down an enemy before they get an actual turn in, and his longevity is good thanks to a good enhanced HP attack and free skills after EX casts. Since he gains natural regen with his LD buff, he's also further boosted by units who boost initial bravery and provide a regen buff of their own. In terms of a damage roll as a physical attacker, he technically has competition from the likes of Garland and Machina, since they also have methods of turn manipulation and free skills, but Noctis' kit as a whole makes him come out on top. There will be Lightning LD coming in a few months, but honestly, it's less one is better than the other and more they both stand on the same plane of power. It should also be noted that the upcoming Arden functions similarly to Noctis, to probably little surprise. However, I would consider Arden more selfish compared to Noctis, besides him also being fully melee. He has more opportunities for follow-up attacks, and instead of turn movement, he gets free turns on break. Similarly, gets a free cast after EX, and his LD buff lets him be unkillable while it's active. So yeah, that's Purple and Burst Noctis. He was probably at the high end of the middle of the pack when his EX Plus arrived, even considering we got it early, but it's the same time as Aranea, who was incredibly powerful. But now, with his rework, LD, and Burst, he rocketed up the rankings and is very comfortably top tier for all of his damage, turn control, and surprising amount of utility. If you like this breakdown of Noctis' kit and want to see others like it, stick around and subscribe, and feel free to check out the playlist of my other purple units as well. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again.